Do you know at this point whether that information was reviewed in a regular manner? Have you investigated why information that seems so important didn't result in changes in policy, rules, or regulations?
I don't know why. What I will say is this was a data request, came from a data request from the NTSB. We made that with the FAA and received information from the Aviation Safety Action Program, ASAP, from ATSAP, which is air traffic control, from mandatory occurrence reports, and we also received information from FAA surveillance data from radar. But this was a request from us, and that resulted in our evaluation of that data and our urgent safety recommendations. It is, I don't know if the FAA pulled that data themselves at any point, and I'd have to defer to the acting administrator on that.
That information was so valuable, so important, so critical that that's the reason you asked for the immediate changes in safety regulations, true?
Yes, and there does seem to be an issue with identifying emerging trends, and looking at, there's a lot of data going to FAA, and taking that data and looking at trends and not specific issues, I think is something not only the IG has raised, but others have raised, even the acting administrator has raised about having to do a better job with analyzing those trends. But it's key, because if we can get it after an accident occurs, what's key is getting it before and preventing it.
This is the wake-up call that suggests whether changes need to be made, true?
Correct.
Administrator, I'm interested in asking you the same series of questions. What did the FAA know prior to this accident? When did they know it? And why wasn't some action taken to encourage and in fact increase the safety, particularly at an airport like DCA and maybe others, and the proximity between helicopter and commercial air service traffic?
Yes, sir. So I'm very concerned about what we've learned in the subsequent investigation, both from the NTSB as well as our own reviews that we immediately took. Clearly, something was missed. I would say immediately after the event, we took the action, again, I referenced earlier, with Undersecretary Duffy's leadership, to restrict air traffic in that area, to ensure there was no helicopter traffic, as well as fixed wing.
My question is, what did not happen at the FAA that would have highlighted this problem earlier, at the time in which this information is acquired by the FAA, but apparently not looked at until the accident?
So the actual process by which there's an ongoing review all the time of the data that is available. As the chair mentioned, there's millions of pieces of data that come in, and I would tell you that we have verified every single near mid-air collision was investigated, but there are certainly those instances where the information itself was not identified, and that's why we've put artificial intelligence and machine learning in place now to ensure that we're able to go through millions and millions, tens of millions of pieces of data to identify those trends and act quickly to mitigate those risks.
There's no question but what, had this information been utilized by the FAA or others, that steps could have been taken to make certain that flying, particularly again in the circumstance of helicopters and commercial aviation at a place like Reagan National Airport, there would have been an opportunity to do something had that information actually been known and acted on.
Yes,
True?
sir. That is correct.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on the chairman's questions, which is also my first question, Mr. Rushlow, can you tell me if this new methodology using the AI or whatever other methodology you're using to look at the aggregate data is being applied to other airports where there is close helicopter traffic in proximity to landing aircraft?
Yes, Senator, it is. We have 10 locations around the United States, including Alaska, Anchorage, that we're looking through right now, what we are referring to as hotspots, to look at similar trends, similar activities as it relates to fixed wing and helicopter operations.
Is this methodology of reviewing aggregate data going to be applied nationwide, not just in this particular area, but to look at the overall trends of near misses at other airports, not just between fixed wing and rotary wing?
Yes, ma'am. So there are 3 activities going on right now. First, the hotspots I referred to. Second is kind of a nationwide use of this review and use of this new capability that we've just admitted. And then, of course, the ongoing analysis and how we're doing that with our industry partners as well as the military.
Thank you. According to NTSB, between, as we've said, between October 2021 and December 2024, there were more than 15,000 instances of commercial aircraft coming close to helicopters. 85 of those had a vertical separation of less than 200 feet. General Brayman, do you know how many of those 85 close calls involved Army helicopters?
Ranking Member Duckworth, we do not.
Can you tell me why that is?
That data in those databases is currently not shared, but certainly the Army is interested in becoming part of an opportunity to share data because that's relevant to our safety as well.
Mr. Rochelle, will the FAA commit to sharing that data with the Army?
Yes, ma'am, we will.
Thank you.
We've also asked for that information, and we're going to share it as part of our investigation with all the parties.
And I think this needs to be ongoing into the future so that especially the military aircraft that are flying within rotary wing close vicinity, these folks should be getting this data, and we can do that moving forward. Mr. Rochelle, well, FAA, or I've already asked that. General Brayman, can you explain the Army's rationale for its policy that gives commanders discretion to determine how many crew chiefs are needed for a particular mission? I think it's important. I don't think that the civilian population understands the extent to which the Army does risk assessment and risk mitigation and risk analysis and that process. I think would be important. And how are you going to be implementing that process moving forward?
Thank you, Ranking Member Duckworth. I realize that I have broad authority as the Army aviation regulation proponent to direct how every aircraft and every operator conducts their mission. But the reality is, and I'm not afraid to take that authority and use it when appropriate, the reality is the best individuals we have to assess the risk of every single flight are our unit commanders because we hold them responsible. They have the authority, the responsibility, and we hold them responsible to take any mission that they authorize, look at the factors involved, understand the people assigned to their organization, and adapt that crew to meet those requirements. And certainly that is something that will be looked at in this investigation. Do we do that? And we will hold commanders accountable if they fail to uphold that responsibility.
Can you speak to if a risk assessment for a particular mission comes in at medium or high risk, how the approval authority of that changes? Because you mentioned the approval authority for the DCA area has been raised higher for ADSB out, correct?
Yeah, yes, Senator. So all missions go through an initial approval process. So a commander has to authorize a reason for an aircraft to fly. At the completion of that authorization, the crew then assesses all the risks associated, known and expected risks associated with the mission they've been tasked to do. That discussion involves a third party, a senior officer or a senior aviator within the organization that then assesses that risk and directs the crew to make any changes to mitigate anything that either that briefing officer understands based on their experience. And then when those things are implemented, it goes back to a commander who must authorize every single flight. So in the occurrence of things like ADSB out operations, that authority resides with a medium risk authority. So a battalion commander must approve that mission in particular. And in this case, the policy allowed that to be delegated down to a company commander. And they must approve that it meets the standards of the policy completely. We have now elevated that risk to high risk. That requires an 06 commander to approve any mission that has ADSB off.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask your indulgence for an extra 30 seconds because my next question I think applies to everybody here, and I think people will be interested.
Please proceed.
Thank you. This is for the FAA. I am hearing that there is a backlog of air traffic controllers waiting to get their FAA medicals approved so that they can return to duty. And we have an air traffic controller shortage right now. I think in the Chicagoland area, there's about a dozen air traffic controllers who are waiting for, they got new medication, whatever it is, but they're waiting as long as 12 to 18 months to get an appointment or to get a ruling from the FAA medical office so that they can actually get back on the job, and they're just sitting there not able to do their job. And I think this is a problem at all of the major airports around the country. I'm sure every one of us has air traffic controllers waiting to be put back onto duty, and they can't because of the backlog with the FAA medical system. Can you speak to that? And will you commit, if I give you a list of my air traffic controllers who've been waiting, will you take a look at those folks and make sure that their medical issues are addressed so we can get them back on the job?
Yes, Senator, I commit to that.
Chairman Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On March 1st, multiple commercial aircraft landing at DCA reported receiving a traffic alert collision avoidance system, a TCAS resolution advisories, as they were preparing to land, advising pilots of an impending threat from above and in some cases directing the crews to take evasive action by descending. I think we were all alarmed that just a few weeks after the tragedy, commercial pilots were being told they were at imminent risk of a deadly mid-air collision. It's now come to my attention that these warnings were caused by the Secret Service and the U.S. Navy improperly testing counter-drone technology at DCA. Apparently, the Navy was using the same spectrum band as TCAS, causing the interference and faulty resolution advisories, even though the FAA had previously warned the Navy and the Secret Service against using that specific spectrum band due to interference risks. Acting Administrator Rushlow, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Let me just say that's deeply disturbing that just a month after 67 people died while on approach to DCA, that the Secret Service and Pentagon would inadvertently cause multiple flights to receive urgent cockpit alerts recommending evasive action. It is inappropriate for such testing to occur at DCA given the facts of what occurred. And I expect this committee to investigate why precisely that happened. General Brayman, I want to turn to your testimony. On March 11th, Chairman Moran and I sent you a letter asking a series of very specific questions. This week, the Army responded with a one-page information paper. However, there were specific questions in the letter that were not answered. I want to turn to them now. We asked you specifically, how frequently does the Army turn off ADS-B out transmission?
Chairman Cruz, as I stated in the discussion about how we approve the missions, a mission would have to fall into the category as defined in the federal regulation and Army policy. It must have national security implications and be sensitive in nature to be able to do that mission.
General, you're not answering my question. My question is, how frequently is ADS-B out turned off? I wasn't asking what the standard is. I was asking the frequency.
I can take the number for record, Senator, but I can tell you the types of missions and the majority of the missions they fly are missions associated with that national security mission.
Is it accurate that ADS-B out is turned off for 100% of missions flown by the Army Air Brigade at Fort Belvoir?
Senator, I think you're referring to the June 8th letter from the Joint Staff to Representative Norton. In the context of missions, meaning the operations that the 12th Aviation supports in their mission requirements, I would say that's an accurate statement. I would not say that's an accurate statement of 100% of the flights being flown by that organization.
Okay, so I want to understand what you mean by missions. Does missions capture training flights?
Only training flights that would have been operating in a location that's sensitive as part of their continuity of government operations.
Well, that would be all of them around DCA, is that correct?
Only specific sites that are part of that continuity of government operation.
In your one-pager, you said 75% of the flights are mission rehearsal readiness flights. Are those operated with ADS-B out?
They are, Senator, yes.
So right now, today, the Army is flying helicopters in and around DCA Airport with ADS-B out turned off. Is that correct?
When conducting their Northcom directed mission, that is correct.
I have to say I find that shocking and deeply unacceptable. And I want to encourage the Army right now to revisit that policy and to revisit that policy today. And I can tell you, if the Army chooses not to, I have a high level of confidence that Congress will pass legislation mandating that you revisit the policy. If today another accident occurs over DCA with another helicopter that had ADS-B out turned off, the Army will have very direct responsibility for that. And I am at a loss to come up with any justification for risking the lives of the traveling public with that decision. You can't change the decisions made yesterday, but you can change decisions made forward. Now, it's my understanding the Army has a memo, August 9th, 2024, entitled ADS-B Out Off Operations in the National Airspace. My staff requested that memo from you, and my understanding is your team declined to provide it. That is also unacceptable. I want to ask you at this hearing, will you commit to providing that memo to this committee?
Senator, I'll commit to reviewing the information and getting what we can to you. Absolutely.
That answer needs to be a yes, that you will provide that memo to this committee.
Senator, we'll review that and we'll look at the ability to give it to the committee. Absolutely.
If it is not provided to this committee within 24 hours, I am confident that you will have a senior commanding officer give you a direct order to provide that committee, provide that memo to this committee. And I just want to underscore, there's no reason the Army has to wait for the conclusion of the NTSB report to revisit your policy on ADS-B out. You can do so right now. And I got to tell you, I spent this morning looking in the eyes of family members who lost family members. I don't know how I would do it tomorrow to another room of family members who lost loved ones because yet another helicopter was flying with ADS-B out. And so I cannot urge you more strongly, change that policy right now.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too have asked for the same memo, so I want to follow on in the same line as Senator Cruz. I also want to associate myself with the information you're requesting on spectrum interference. This is one of the issues that I think, one of the reasons why I think spectrum and spectrum fights are so important is because I think the agencies with adjacency and issues, we can't leave this up to the flying public. And but I want to go back because Brigadier General, you mentioned in your testimony, we now have the additive dialogue that we just heard, but you said it's not allowed. You're saying it's not allowed. ADBS out was not allowed. That's what you said earlier. Is that in your testimony? In addition to the Holmes letter, you basically stated that using ADBS out, it's not like it was it was not allowed.
Army policy is ADS-B out is not to be used for routine use.
Okay, so acting administrator, did you know this? Did the FAA know this? Did the FAA know and understand and absorb this? Did you know that you were allowing a flight to go within 75 feet of each other and there was no signaling message that we have already identified as a safety measure is something that we have had as a requirement?
So I understand the FAA was aware of this. We have an existing memorandum of agreement with the Department of Defense.
Did you know it was 100% as the Eleanor Holmes Norton and as the Brigadier General is pretty clear this morning, we don't allow it, even to the point of not answering Senator Cruz when they're going to change it, because I'm pretty sure their attitude is going to be, we don't allow it. He's going to say he would rather have a route somewhere where he can fly without it. That's what he's going to say. And so, you know, that's a separate issue over here. Our job, though, is the FAA oversight, and you can't give exemptions to things that you don't understand. And so he, in their application, kind of made it sound like, well, it's not going to be that routine. But he's very clear They're never turning it on if they don't have to. They're never turning it on. So what I don't understand is why the FAA didn't understand that. Why you would allow this design. This is the wrong design. Whoever said you could fly in this airspace this close together without a safety feature that was already being required by the FAA and then giving them an exemption makes no sense. So why did you allow it to happen?
So I can't speak to why the previous administration may have allowed for that memorandum of agreement, which is why we, effective today, will require in any DCA Class B airspace, ADS-B out to be turned on, except in very limited circumstances.
What are those other limited circumstances?
So that
other
would-
agencies? Is there any other agency that's doing this?
So that we have 46 different helicopter operators within the National Capital Region. But again, DCA Class B airspace will now require ADS-B on to be out.
What other agencies are operating this way?
So we have certainly a number of military units. We have local law enforcement. We certainly have the Department of Justice and FBI. We have a number of different agencies that fly the Park Police, and those are the entities that we're working with closely now to make sure, first and foremost, they understand the new restrictions that we have in the airspace.
Do they have exemptions?
Some of them do.
Are you concerned about this?
Absolutely, which is why we immediately put in place the requirement to have ADS-B out on.
And so you think they're operating that way?
Yes, ma'am.
You think that Homeland Security is operating that way?
They are operating, effective today, they will be operating with ADS-B.
Effective today?
Yes, ma'am.
So for the last month, you've known, as I am going to submit for the record, a letter from the Department of Homeland Security that basically says, under the Federal Aviation Waiver, all U.S. Custom and Border Protection, air and marine operations in the capital region basically have this exemption as well.
So
And
they haven't had.
So I want to understand, if people were
Sure.
still flying in this airspace, we all fly in and out of this airspace.
Right.
Do we now have to worry about other operators in this airspace that may be doing the same thing as happened with the military?
So
And
I
now
should-
you're telling me you're going to take action today.
I should clarify, immediately after the accident, we put the restrictions in place so that no mixed traffic could occur. No helicopters and fixed wing in the same airspace. Today, we're requiring the ADS-B out to be on. So previous to this day, the fixed wing as well as helicopters were not allowed in the airspace. So we cleared the complexity of that airspace.
Now today, you're going to say to Homeland Security, you have to have ADBS, basically the automatic surveillance broadcast system has to be on. You're going to make that today.
That's correct.
Well, I
For
would.
any of the Class B airspace that you can see in the graphic, in that red airspace, that's required.
Acting Administrator, you're not building faith in this system of oversight of the FAA if you're telling me that we now have a bunch of other operators in this airspace that you now said after the accident were prohibited, but now you're going to turn it back on, and if they meet this requirement. And we have letters from them thinking that they're exempted. I want to see this rule. This would have been a great debate with Mr. Bradbury before the committee, because the American people, these poor families have lost loved ones. This is not their day job. It is your day job. It is the day job of the FAA not to allow these exemptions to become prolific and everybody use them, and then us have to sit here and figure out how to do our oversight job of you to make sure that these details are exposed when we can't even get a memo from some of these agencies. So, Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired, but I will come for a second round with the witnesses, because I think it's clear. The NTSB has been very clear on the requirements for ADS-B in, and in this case, if they would have listened to them, it's $40,000 to equip, $20,000 to equip one plane. You could probably equip the whole fleet of aviation for $100 million. I guarantee you their lives, the family lives, are worth that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before recognizing Senator Budd, does the FAA, Mr. Rushlow, does it have the authority to supersede the operations of the Army and these other agencies in the airspace around airports? We haven't gotten the Army to say they're going to do this with their own policy, but you say you're mandating it. Do we know that the Army and others have to follow your mandate?
Yes, sir, they do.
Okay. Senator Biden.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I want to offer my condolences and prayers to all the families that are here today. I'm saddened that so many North Carolinians were lost in this accident, including Captain Rebecca Lobach and the 4 members of 5342's Charlotte-based flight crew. Samuel Lilly, Jonathan Campos, Denasia Elder, and Ian Epstein. Senator Moran, I'm sorry for the loss of so many Kansans as well in this incident, and I want to thank you for organizing this hearing. Chair Hamady, thanks for your work so far. On page 9 of the preliminary report, it states that the MPFR, the multi-purpose flight recorder's reading for pressure altitude conflicted with other altitudes readings. Ultimately, this conflict led your team to invalidate the pressure altitude reading provided by the recorder. Can you provide any details on the differing altitude readings? And do you have any update on whether this conflicting data was limited to the MPFR or if that was provided to the flight crew and perhaps was a confusing factor?
We are still looking into that and doing some testing. What I will say is the pressure altitude was determined invalid on the Black Hawk because we would expect that to be somewhat similar to the CRJ, but it was much lower. So we determined that that was invalid and it couldn't be used to calculate the barometric altitude. We would need 2 sets of data, which is pressure altitude and barometric pressure setting. We had the pressure setting. We don't have the pressure pressure altitude data for that. So we can't, we were not able to determine from that what the barometric altitude was of the Black Hawk. However, we are looking at other data.
Okay, thank you. General Braun, Pat 25 was operating out of Davison Army Airfield on a pilot annual standardization mission at the time of the collision. Given the concentration of senior military and civilian officials surrounding DCA, how vital are these missions to readiness for continuity of government operations?
Senator, they're extremely vital. To go back to Senator Cruz's question about how many flights are done, 75% of the missions flown by the 12th Aviation Battalion are in direct support of the continuity of government, rehearsals, exercises, and making sure crews are familiar with how to get that mission accomplished. And they stand ready every single day in a 15-minute alert string to do that mission.
Thank you, General. Can the Army continue to fulfill its priority air missions, air transport missions, without access to Route 1 and Route 4?
The Army is certainly, the fact that we're in the working groups will allow us to help influence routing that will allow us to continue to do that mission. I'm confident we can do that.
Thank you. Chair Hamady, again, in your view, is the permanent closure of Route 4 the only solution that allows for continued operations of both rotary and fixed-wing aircraft around DCA?
And it's permanent closure when runways 15 and runway 33 are in use. That was our recommendation to the FAA.
Thank you.
Yep.
Administrator Rushlow, the aviation investigation report from the NTSB shows that the separation between an aircraft on approach of runway 33 would have a mere 75 feet of separation from a helicopter operating on Route 4 and hugging the shoreline of the East Bank of the Potomac. Was the FAA aware of this conflict prior to January 29th? And given the insufficient vertical separation that we're talking about, was the FAA relying solely on controllers in the DCA tower to deconflict the approach to runway 33?
So the FAA was aware of the design of that airspace in advance of December 29th. I would say that's one of the reasons why we immediately restricted that airspace after the incident to review the circumstances around the airspace itself. In addition to that, it's one of the reasons why we are looking at hotspots or mixed traffic areas around the nation, whether that's Boston, Dallas, LA, and Anchorage.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator, can I?
Please.
There is a DC helicopter working group that we have been trying to figure out who is part of the working group and get minutes and get documents from that working group to see what information was shared and what was discussed over the years. We have not been able to attain that yet, and I hope we can from FAA and others.
Are you a part of that working group?
We are not part of that working group.
But you have access to it, and they are willing to provide what they find.
We have requested information. We have not even been able to identify who is part of the working group firmly and get documents as part of that working group. We've requested all of that information because we do want to evaluate what was discussed. We're also going to interview the FAA cartographers on how this route was mapped, because that 75 feet is max. That is the maximum. It goes down from there as the glide slope comes down to, as commercial aircraft approach runway 33.
Thank you.
So let me see if I can help Senator Hamady, Chairman Hamady.
That's a very hard job. No.
You are very good at public relations with senators, but we recognize the challenges you face. So do either one of you belong to this working group? Does the Army or the FAA participate? And can you answer that so the NTSB can pursue information?
I mean, the FAA, it's the FAA's working group.
It's the FAA's working group. All right. Mr. Rushlow, what's the problem?
I'm happy to work with the chair. We've been working extremely closely together on this investigation, and I'm happy to work with the chair and understand why she hasn't received that information and make sure we follow up on that.
Can you think of any reason that NTSB shouldn't be a part of that information?
Off the top of my head, I can't. I don't know why they would be restricted in that, and I certainly will talk to my folks when we get back.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, should we ask is the Army part of this working group as well?
The Army is part of the working group. Yes, Senator.
There are apparently 17 entities that are a part of the working group. We just haven't been able to verify who all the entities are.
Surely the FAA is in charge, and they can help you.
Surely I would have been happy to understand that before today and work
General,
with
you
the
know any
chair.
reasons that the working group's efforts can't be known by NTSB?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Let me follow up. Mr. Rochelow indicated that the FAA does have the authority to require ATSB out. Do you agree with that assessment that the FAA can make this decision, and if you don't follow the FAA policies, then you're precluded from the airspace?
Chairman, the Army operates 100% under FAA authority.
Very good. And let me turn to the perhaps the next steps or new information, and to this I'll go to Chair Hamady. Since the report that we're discussing here today is 2 weeks old, what has transpired, if anything, in those 2 weeks? Have you discovered any new and relevant information that you can share with us?
Where would you like me to begin? One thing I can say on ADSB out, off, that's policy of the Army, but we are also we are still looking at installation programming and potential for equipment malfunction. And the reason I mention this is because the accident helicopter, for this accident helicopter, no ADSB data had been received from an FAA ground station for 730 days prior to the accident. And that was abnormal. So we began looking at the fleet for the battalion. The battalion had 25 helicopters. That includes this particular helicopter. 9 of them were Mike models, and all were transmitting ADSB out when they were turned on, because we have to verify that it's working. There were 16 Limas, including the accident helicopter, which we're still looking at, but 7 were transmitting when ADSB out was turned on. 8 were not, and stopped doing so sometime between May and November 2023. We don't know why. 5 of those started transmitting since the NTSB identified the issue and began working with the Army to try to isolate the reason. So I just want to let you know that you can have ADSB out on, but you also have to make sure that it's working.
You indicated working with the Army, but there's other participants in this arena.
Absolutely.
And then were you narrowing it to the Army as if something is necessarily wrong there? Or more broadly, there's a problem in receiving the information?
For the ADSB out on, we wanted to look at the helicopter fleet for the battalion to see if whether ADSB out on, when turned on, was actually transmitting data. Because we did think it was abnormal that for the helicopter involved in the accident wasn't transmitting data for so long.
Any explanation, General?
Chairman, this exactly is what the value of the investigation is. There are things that you would not normally look at that are being determined here, and that's certainly going to help us drive policy and any changes that we need to do as a result of the investigation. And certainly the NTSB has the expertise to do that.
So what we're hearing from Chair Hamady is that there may be, it may be transmitting, it may be on, but there's no receipt. There's, I don't know, technical problems in the process by which it's not providing the information it's supposed to provide, right?
Chairman, obviously the functionality of any Army equipment, and certainly Army aviation equipment, is important to me. So if we're discovering that there's a challenge there, we will take direct action, absolutely.
This is not an inconsequential thing, right?
It's not. And I think for the public watching, because I think there are a lot of people watching, is ADSB out broadcasts latitude, longitude, and altitude and velocity once per second. It updates once per second versus 4 to 6 seconds for radar, which is significant when you have converging aircraft.
Mr. Rochelow, you indicated as of today, there's a change in policy at FAA. I would be interested in knowing if that change in policy is only related to DCA airspace, or you are making those requirements, putting those requirements in place for other airports.
Thank you, Senator. So the requirements that I announced today are effective for the DC Class B airspace immediately. That part of our ongoing work, as I related earlier with respect to hotspots and the mixed traffic that we've seen that could be problematic, are areas where we're looking at kind of adding that requirement in. It seems premature simply along the lines of the way airspace is structured in different locations that we need to focus before acting too quickly. So we want to make sure that as we're looking at the different airspaces and how they're constructed, that we're taking kind of intentional, careful action.
And that intentional action is underway. You're doing
Yes,
that
sir.
at other airports
Absolutely.
today.
And wherever we find a risk, we will mitigate that risk immediately.
Chairman Hamady, I asked you a question, then I interrupted you, and you sound like your answer would be lengthy of the things that you've learned in the last 2 weeks. I'll come back to you after recognizing the two senators to my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on what Chairwoman Hamady is talking about, testing the ADSB out, whether it's actually transmitting data because the data was not received. Will we be able to check that with all of the other rotary wing operators that are in this region as well? Is that something the FAA should be mandating? Is that they could do that? I mean, you're not looking at the other operators because they're not part of this accident, correct? So then my question for Mr. Rushlow is, will you be directing, will the FAA be directing all of the other helicopter operators, whether it's Homeland Security, local law enforcement, who have this exemption to ADSB out, will you be directing that they actually test their equipment to make sure that it is actually transmitting the data that can be received?
Yes, Senator, I think that's part of our ongoing work in the collaboration between those operators and how we make sure they first and foremost understand the requirement, and second, that their equipment is functional.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to also follow up on my earlier questioning about the FAA's air traffic controller workforce, I had you had committed to looking at the list of names I gave you that I will be giving you for air traffic controllers who are waiting for medical review. I would like for you I'd like for you to commit to reporting back to me in writing about how many controllers around the country are waiting for medical clearances so that they can return to work, and what the FAA is doing to make sure these medical reviews are happening in a timely manner.
I will commit to that.
Thank you. In the race to hire more air traffic controllers, and then the staffing was adequate on that evening, but we could have used more air traffic controllers, obviously. And in the race to hire more air traffic controllers, I want to make sure the FAA does not lower your long-standing high standards for air traffic controllers. There could be a temptation to sacrifice effectiveness for efficiency, but the FAA must stick to its stringent standards to protect safety. Can you assure this committee that as the administration works to hire more air traffic controllers, you will not in any way lower the high standards that is currently required for individuals to become certified air traffic controllers? And there's plenty of places, a lot of them are in actually Kansas, that have the expertise to help us train air traffic controllers, as long as we keep those high standards.
100%. Part of our ongoing activity to surge in air traffic controller hiring is to look for the best and the brightest, and that's exactly what we're going to continue to do.
Thank you. You're back, Mr. Chair.
To follow up on Senator Duckworth, you should look to Kansas, and we welcome you. I'm going to turn to Senator Schmidt in just 1 second. General, the senator from Illinois was asking about routine maintenance and determining whether equipment is working. You have a standard in place that what Chairwoman Amity said. It doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't know there were problems with the transmission or the equipment. Do you have a protocol in place and that equipment inspected on a continuing basis?
Certainly, Chairman, with general aviation operations, we have protocols for the status of aircraft. I will have to get back to you and take it for the record on what the protocol is to ensure that ADS-B out transmissions outside of the aircraft are being received. It's something I'll have to look on. How do we do that?
And whether protocol is being followed.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my friend from Illinois would agree. I certainly don't want to. I don't want to see us reduce standards. I guess, in following in that same spirit, with Mr. Rochlow, can you commit that no hiring decisions will be made based on race?
Yes, sir. Again, we're looking for the best and the brightest, and we're prioritizing those who are best qualified.
Because, as you know, there's a lawsuit by about 1,000 folks who are claiming that they didn't get a job because of their race, the FAA.
We're all about making sure the best and the brightest are there, and we do that through a testing mechanism.
That's great to hear. I did want to ask, General, and again, I apologize if this has been asked before. They're running us in and out of here, different committee hearings, armed services. I did want to ask, this was a very strong crew in the Black Hawk. Is it typical, or I guess, is it a problem? Is it typical and is it a problem to have someone who is a lower rank as this is my understanding, that the evaluator was a lower rank than the pilot? Is that a typical situation? Is that problematic? Is that not a problem? Do you think it contributed in any way? I just wanted to get your assessment.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. It is extremely typical in Army aviation because the preponderance of our force are our warrant officers, and they are professional aviators. That's what they do for their entire career. And so they are instructor pilots, or maintenance test pilots, or safety officers, and our commissioned officers fill roles of leadership within the organization. So it's a very routine to have a senior member being evaluated by a junior member.
Okay, so I'm sure you've gone through this analysis, and I just feel like in the spirit of making sure we're getting this right moving forward, that you don't think there's a systemic problem associated with maybe somebody with a lower rank saying something to somebody of a higher rank in those kind of situations. You've went through that analysis, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, and that is certainly the personalities of crew members and capabilities is something that is considered in that risk brief process for every single flight. Is it the right crew? Is the crew mixed properly? Commanders would know if there's issues with simple as they don't get along. And commanders would take that into account before approving any flight.
And I guess for the FAA, and again, maybe you've been asked this before, but clearly in the chairman's opening statement and a number of the committee members, just the report, the statistics of the number of near misses between helicopters and aircraft landing at DCA, that, you know, those operations now have been halted. Can you just explain to the American people why that didn't happen before?
So, again, I'll say that the reports that were come in previously were certainly analyzed, but something was missed, and since that time, we've been using new tools available to us, artificial intelligence, machine learning, to be able to scan the tens of millions of data points, to be able to do that analysis in a more proactive and ideally at some point here predictive way to head off, to identify risk earlier and to mitigate that risk.
But this wasn't a new issue at DCA, right? This is an issue that had been a longstanding concern. Is that accurate?
It's accurate. There were a number of reports that came in, and I would say that we've, as I mentioned earlier, we investigate every single near mid-air collision, and even as we talk about spectrum issues, Chairman Cruz mentioned, we have teams that go out and assess the airspace itself, making sure that we're working with partners, whether it's on counter-UAS technology, to make sure that airspace is as clean as possible from interference.
And so moving forward, obviously it's a response to the tragedy that happened, and I would be remiss not to express my condolences to the families who are here. I know everyone has, and it's devastating for each and every one of you, including some folks from back home. And so your advocacy does matter, and it will carry beyond today, right? This is important. So I ask in the spirit of that, moving forward then, is that how you see things, that the state of play as it currently is now will continue?
Yes, sir. We'll continue to use the latest tools we have to be able to assess that data and work with the industry, with the aviation ecosystem, if you will, to identify that risk early and to mitigate that risk immediately.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Mr. Rocheleau, at the moment, whether it's on or off is irrelevant because there's no flights. You're announcing something that doesn't, at the moment, matter because you have not lifted the ban on the flights. Is that true?
So it's helpful to, if I can just point to the graphic. In the graphic, I can explain that in the yellow sectioned area, the graphic there, that is where there is no mixed traffic. No helicopters, no fixed wing.